I'm Rachel Bell, and this is Your Last Meal, the show where celebrities share stories about the foods they love most, and we dig into the history, culture, or science of those meals with experts from around the world. Today on the program, New York Times best-selling author J. Ryan Stradal. J. Ryan has written 3 novels, all set in Minnesota: Kitchens of the Great Midwest, The Lager Queen of Minnesota, and Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club. I have read and enjoyed all 3 books over the last few months. Now, I have never been to Minnesota, but when I think of Minnesotan food, I think of hot dish. Cream of mushroom soup, tater tots, casserole dishes covered in foil. But there is another Midwestern culinary tradition that is less well known to outsiders: the Supper Club.
You get fried fish on Fridays, prime rib on Saturdays, a swarm of alcohol, brandy old fashions, grasshoppers and pink squirrels for dessert. If you're at a real traditional supper club, an old school one, you'll get a lot of free food before you even order.
I love free food so much, I am prepared to pay for a flight to Minnesota and a hotel room in order to get it. I chat with the owners of 2 multi-generational supper clubs to find out what sets them apart from regular restaurants. That's coming up later in the show. But first, my conversation with J. Ryan Stradal. Maybe 3 months ago, I was going on vacation and I was trying to find a book, and a friend of mine dropped off on my doorstep Kitchens of the Great Midwest. And it is now, I know it's not a new book, it's almost 10 years old, but it's my favorite book of the year.
Oh, awesome.
9 years later. So I have since read Lager Queen, and then I'm like 85% through the Lakeside Supper Club.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Yeah. So now I'm like a big stan.
Oh, wow.
And I got a press release about the book going into paperback, and I was like, hey, I just read all those books. I'll have them on the show.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So it was a fun little coincidence. I was like reading the book when I got the press release.
Wow. What are the chances?
Yeah. I know. Food and drink run through all of your novels.
Yeah.
But it's not exactly the star of the book. You know, they're people focused. So, you know, how does that work for you? Like, why did you decide to put food in all of your books? How does food play as a character in your writing?
I grew up in an environment where I didn't have access to the variety of food I would have liked. Growing up in a smaller town in Minnesota, I was constantly reading about food in magazines and books and newspapers, like reading reviews of new restaurants up in the cities in the Star Tribune and Minneapolis St. Paul magazine and stuff like that. And I thought, as soon as I can drive, I'm going to go eat all the food I haven't had yet. I got to give my parents some credit. You know, they were working class people raising a couple kids. They put food on the table. I can't complain. But they weren't adventurous chefs. In fact, they viewed cooking as just a process that had to be done to assure the caloric intake of their children. I felt like it was very procedural to them and lacked passion. And I knew that existed out there, too. I knew there were people who loved cooking. And since having a kid myself, it's been harder for me to maintain any sense of adventure because I'm thinking about what's he going to eat? Which, of course, coming full circle, is extremely bland. Yeah. I don't know if you have kids yourself, but our 4-year-old, when he has his druthers, he wants everything completely plain. He wants just the plainest food imaginable. So back where I started.
You're being punished. Yeah. So what was an example of food at your house growing up? What were your parents cooking?
Well, we had a Schwann's delivery person. Did they have that where you grew up? The Schwann's man, it's like a frozen food truck. Yeah. They specialize in ice cream, but yeah, they came to your house. It was like a subscription service. It was kind of ahead of its time like that, but also kind of a throwback to the era of the milkman and so on, where this person would come and usually would come in and have a cup of coffee with you and, you know,
really?
Quite often, depending on the customer. I mean, my mom was very social, so we were one of the people that oh, hey, take a seat if you got the time and let's catch up. You know, how are the kids? That kind of thing.
So Midwestern.
Right. And also he knew our order. And one of the things that we ordered frequently, this frozen white chicken breasts and orange roughy. It was probably my least favorite kind of fish growing up. And it's overfished. I don't think you can get it anywhere now, at least legally. But it was generally the kind of fish that tasted exclusively like whatever you cooked it in. So you could at least give it that, it was at least a vessel for more adventurous cooks. And my parents weren't that. So we were just kind of eating baked or pan-fried orange roughy a lot, along with literally just an unadorned white chicken breast. We're talking about like mediocre wedding food. It felt like
Yeah, you were always at a conference, like a
yes,
work
exactly.
conference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just this unadorned plain chicken breast with like a side of vegetables and rice-a-roni. I remember having that a lot. Yeah, my dad would try to make hamburgers and he would burn them. He was one of those guys that likes everything well done. He was a former army guy, and so he would make this stuff that he made in the army that he called slumgullion, which was basically like a can of chicken noodle soup without any water added. Then he would just throw stuff into, like leftover chicken breasts. Yeah, it was sort of like a stone soup of whatever was in the kitchen at the time, and this was before reality cooking shows made those kinds of adventures interesting. He'd also make this dish he called whiplash, which was like yesterday's goulash fried, just that kind of stuff. And we didn't eat out a lot. I just knew there had to be a better way, or at least a different way.
I like at least that the dishes your dad made had these very dramatic movie title names. Tonight for dinner, it's whiplash.
Exactly. Exactly. They had to be exciting in some way. So at least the nomenclature was alluring. Yeah.
Coming soon to a table near you. Slumgullion.
Yeah.
So it sounds like once you were able to drive, you did start exploring food. Talk about that a little bit.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you asked about this because I really got an opportunity to go down memory lane. One of the first restaurants I read about, I think it was in either Minnesota Monthly or Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, was a restaurant called the Barbary Fig, which was a North African restaurant opened by a chef, I believe from Algeria originally, in St. Paul on Grand Avenue. And I knew Grand Avenue. I'd been there. There was a really great children's bookstore there, and been there with my mom book shopping. And it's a neat commercial street. McAllister College is on it, so it has that kind of college vibe that also ensures more affordable food.
Yeah.
And it also had a pretty wide variety of cuisine. And I had never even heard of a lot of these nouns before. Tagine, shakshuka, saffron, complete mysteries to me. I'd read about this in a magazine, and the chef was wearing a shirt that I owned in his interview. It was from Structure. If you remember that store, it was like the men's version of Limited Express in the 90s.
Okay.
Like when I wasn't spending my disposable income on food, I was spending it on clothes, and I liked that store. And I was like, oh, he owns that shirt. And that's originally what grabbed me. And then I'd read about his restaurant. It sounded intriguing. Like every dish he mentioned was something I literally had never heard about before. I mean,
how old were you? Were you like 16 when
16, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I called my girlfriend, Stacy, and said, how do you feel about eating North African food? And she's a very adventurous person. You know, she went on to end up getting a graduate degree from the University of Bologna and living in Italy for a while and married a Turkish lawyer and, ended up having a much more international life than I ever dreamed of. But like we were young, and I don't think we'd even been out of the country at that point, either of us. And so we had to experience it through the Minnesotan version of that cuisine. And I remember just being blown away by the flavor. It was like you didn't know the power had gone out in your house, and then the power comes back on. It was like that kind of shock. Yeah, just whoa, yeah.
Flavor.
Like exactly. And I thought there has to be more of that. And after that, we eventually branched out into Minneapolis and other parts of the cities, but Grand Avenue really was my entree to the food of the world. I just thank that article on that one particular chef in that magazine that caught my attention, and it all started there.
Did your parents have an opinion about this? Were they confused by your interest in the culinary when they didn't seem to have any?
Yeah, my mom was amused by it, and she'd often ask for reports on how things were, but I don't think she ever expressed any interest in going there herself.
Uh-huh.
She seemed kind of judgment-free about it. And my dad, yeah, I think he found it to be a curiosity as well. My dad was even less interested in actually exploring this cuisine. Other than that, yeah, it was sort of like having a child that's into a sport that you don't watch or understand. And like, well, it doesn't seem to be hurting them and they're getting something out of it. Yeah.
And this is like pre-Food Network, because now it's so normal to have teenagers just completely into food and understanding it and cooking these elaborate things. But at that time, I was the same. I was reading about it in the newspaper.
Yeah. Yeah. It was
Yeah.
totally weird to be a teenage foodie in the 1990s. Yeah, that term didn't even exist yet. We didn't know what to call ourselves. I was just talking with my friend Jeremy Schmidt up in Seattle. I've known him since I was 8 years old, and he's one of the biggest foodies I know. But he didn't have that sense of adventure as a kid, and he remembers me having that, and he looks back on it with a kind of amusement now. He's like, "You were way ahead of the curve, man. You were out there, trying new food." And yeah, and I was like, "Yeah, you could have come with," but he was spending his disposable income going to concerts and buying CDs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a normal teenager.
Like a normal teenager. And as you may remember, CDs weren't cheap then. That was like $16 at a place like Sam Goody for a CD. And so that was much more expensive than a plate of shakshuka at the Barbary Fig. So I could eat out at restaurants more often than my friends could buy CDs.
Oh my God. I could feel you wearing khakis, kind of trying to save your money, making these financial decisions.
That's right. Pleated khakis and oversized like plaid shirts, Yeah.
I like to say you can tell how old a man is by counting the pleats in his khakis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The Barbary Fig was your first experience, your first foray into eating. And talk about the last time you ate there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was like near the end of my book tour for Kitchens of the Great Midwest. And I was there by myself. I was in Minnesota for an event, did over 120 events for Kitchens. A lot in the Midwest. It turns out you put the word Midwest in your title and you go there a lot. I was really grateful for it because it allowed me the opportunity when I could to go back and visit some of these places. I hadn't lived in Minnesota a long time by this point. I moved to California in 1998. And so I went back to the Barbary Fig in 2016 and I sat alone at a table and ate the shakshuka by myself and just started crying. It was just so good. And it just brought back all these memories, all these Proustian memories of having this dish with different people over the years. And, walked in there, same guys working, that one chef that owned the place, made all the food himself.
Wearing the same shirt.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Just, it was such an emotional experience to come back after a book I'd written, not to get too sentimental about it, but partially because of the influence of this specific restaurant and just what it opened up for me was incredibly meaningful and moving. And, the shakshuka had gone up in price a little bit by then, but I think maybe it was like $16 by that point. But
it's the same as a CD.
Right, exactly. Now it's a 1-for-1. And I remember just had shakshuka and water and leaving $40 on the table, like tipping the server 100% of the bill, just out of just gratitude for the experience and just her tolerating just someone crying alone at a table. She was certainly aware of it and allowed me my envelope of privacy to process whatever it was I was going through and was appropriately attentive, but not invasive per se.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for putting up with me. I'm probably a downer to your other customers. I didn't know that was going to be my last experience there, but I felt like it could have been. I treated it like I wasn't sure when I was ever going to make it back. So I said thank you to the chef on my way out. And the next time I read about the place was about a year later. Yeah, he announced he was closing. Yeah. And he was just tired. I mean, he had been running the place for
decades.
How long would it have been by then? Yeah, almost 25 years.
When we come back, Jay Ryan shares his last meal. What would your last meal be?
Oh, wow. Wow. If I could somehow have the shakshuka from the Barbary Fig again, that'd be great.
I mean, it's a fantasy meal, so that could be. You can have whatever you want.
Have you read a book called The Kamigawa Food Detectives by Hisashi Ashiwai, Japanese author? It's in translation now. It just came out a couple months ago, translated by Jesse Kirkwood. That's the premise of the book. It's this father-daughter duo who run a small restaurant in Japan where they make meals from people's past. Like someone will come in and say like, I really want the specific stew or curry I had 35 years ago in Hokkaido in April. And they'll basically do forensic research to find out, okay, what would have been in a stew in that part of Japan at that time. what characteristics do those ingredients have. It's like a
Love
detective
that.
story about food and about people researching food history as a means of providing an emotional catharsis for a customer. And it actually cuts right to the premise of that question too. Like, because I'm having North African style shakshuka, and I've had shakshuka many times in many places since then. Lebanese, Israeli, from Trader Joe's. But North African shakshuka made from ingredients purchased in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Right.
Yeah. So you've got to run it through that filter too.
I must read that book. That sounds awesome. I love the sound of it. As much as you have been able to forensically figure out in your mind and taste buds what was in that shakshuka as far as what makes a North African, because I know Israeli, but I don't think I've had another version.
There was lamb in it. Was the meat. Yeah. And the lamb had caraway seeds, I think. Onions, eggs, of course.
Did it have the tomato roasted red pepper base, or did it have a different kind of sauce?
It felt like a different sauce. I believe there were tomatoes and red peppers in it, but it didn't dominate the flavor the way I've experienced it in other shakshukas. The caramelized onions I remember as like one of the primary flavors. I'd never had anything caramelized at age 16 at that point. That along with the lamb. I don't think I'd had lamb before. It was incredible. Like what I wouldn't give to be back in those shoes having that experience again for the first time. But yeah, I remember caramelized onions and lamb really being the dominant flavors.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen one that had meat in it before.
Mm-hmm. To that, a note, he changed the name in the menu later on. He ended up calling it lamb hash the last couple of years of the restaurant instead of shakshuka. Maybe people had called him out like, this isn't shakshuka. I was expecting this other thing. And like by 2016, more people had other kinds of shakshuka and were probably coming in with notes or ideas or preconceptions, feeling disappointed they weren't getting that, when really they should just read the ingredients list and been happy with it.
I'm like trying to quietly Google while you're talking, and I found a Star Tribune review from 2013. All that it says is lamb, sausage, eggs, tomatoes, and peppers.
Yeah, no, all those sound right. I remember Stacy, my girlfriend at the time, called the restaurant, asked to get the recipe so she could make it. He quoted some price that was inhospitable at the time, like $450.
Oh, wow. Yeah, he was
like a barrier of entry. Yeah, he's like, I will sell it to you for $450. He told her. And she was like, no. You're like, okay. Yeah.
Okay, bye.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking at pictures of the chef online, and he's giving me big soup Nazi vibes.
Oh.
He has a little red ascot on and a white button-up shirt, and he has
a mustache.
And a mustache. Yeah. He looks similar. Yeah. One other question about the dish, because I found a menu on Yelp where it cost $8, so it must have been an old one.
I remember $9. Yeah, but
okay.
Wow. Yeah.
But it says eggs scrambled with margay sausage, caramelized onions, and fresh tomato. Were the eggs scrambled? Because normally, okay, so it wasn't like the eggs cracked in like you see in Middle Eastern shakshuka. Okay, so this was a kind of a different dish than I think most people think of.
If you open the restaurant now, I think he'd have to call it like a lamb and egg scramble. It would be so unfamiliar to anyone who knows shakshuka now and knows it the way you're describing and the way I've experienced it almost exclusively since having it at the Barbary Fig. His variation on the theme might be a somewhat liberal notion of the term shakshuka, but it could also be regional to his specific part of his native country in just a way that most American diners are familiar with. Or it could also just be his own twist on it. Never been to Algeria. I don't know where in Algeria he's from exactly, and there may be regional variations on that theme. Whatever you want to call it, this was a delicious meal. Yeah. And it just, like I said, just blew away my untrained, homogenous rural Minnesota palate in 1992.
I think it would be hard to get it right. But now that you have a little of these foundational ingredients, I think you should try, because merguez sausage, you get that'll probably have all the spices you remember. And just try doing, and it also said fresh tomatoes. So I don't know if that's raw, but maybe you could try to do a scramble kind of thing and see how close you get and then work on it from there. I want you to have this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This sounds totally doable. I had never thought about this before today, about how I could actually make this. Yeah, I could put it together. No, this is awesome. I'm so glad we had this conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you asked this question, because people ask variations of like, what They more often ask like, who would you want to have at your last meal? They don't ask what the meal is. Yeah. So thanks so much for the question, for taking me down this route, and then also putting me on a mission here.
I love it. For his last meal, J. Ryan Stradal wants the Shakshuka from Barbary Fig, a St. Paul, Minnesota restaurant that closed in 2016. Shakshuka is a North African dish, eaten in places like Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, Libya. When Maghrebi Jews migrated from North Africa to Israel in the 1950s, they brought this dish with them. And shakshuka has since become an Israeli staple, showing up on restaurant menus in the 1990s. At its most basic, shakshuka is a chunky tomato and onion sauce, often with roasted red peppers, and eggs are cracked directly into the sauce to poach. The spices can vary. There can be preserved lemon, sheep's milk cheese, harissa, merguez sausage, but it's always eggs cooked in the sauce until they're oozy and saucy. Perfect for sopping up with bread. All right, so I sleuthed around trying to find a version of shakshuka with scrambled eggs, caramelized onions, merguez sausage, and tomato, like J. Ryan describes from Barbary Fig. But the most similar dish I found was the Turkish dish menemen, which is eggs scrambled with tomatoes and peppers. So I tried tracking down Barbary Fig's former chef owner, Brahim Haj Musa, because I wanted to know if his version is traditional to a particular region or if it's just his own creation. But he didn't write me back. So for now, it remains a mystery. But if you're listening and you know this dish, scrambled eggs, merguez sausage, caramelized onions, tomatoes, or you have some clues about it, send me a message. You can find me on Instagram at HelloRachelBell. You can send me a message through my newsletter if you're subscribed, rachelbell.substack.com, or you can find my email address if you dig around a bit on yourlastmealpodcast.com. So is that what you would want, just that, or would you want anything on the side, anything to drink?
Oh, wow.
Is there any like bread that goes along with it, side dishes?
Oh, sure. I'd love to have
dessert?
it with bread. Love to have it with just a fresh sliced baguette, just something to soup it up with. I love dipping bread in things. I love using bread as a vessel. I just love treating a meal as a condiment, kind of.
Yeah.
I just love dipping things in things. I've loved that since I was a kid. Yeah. And in terms of what to drink, I don't know. Like, what kind of wine would pair well with that? Let me see. The sausages are a little spicy, so maybe like a Southern French wine, like a Rhone or something, a Rhone Red. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think? What would you pair with it?
I don't know. I'm not good with pairings. As much as I'm into food and cooking, I feel like that's the final frontier that I haven't investigated as much. I'm also more of a beer drinker, so I feel like in my mind I was thinking of beer.
Oh yeah. What's a good beer to pair with, like, with merguez sausage probably being the dominant flavor here? What would you pair with that beer wise?
I think that since it's probably a little spicy and has a lot of flavor, you would want something that's really crisp and not so hoppy so that it wouldn't compete. So yeah, I'm not sure. I have to think about it, but definitely more of a lager.
Yeah.
But not super malty.
Right. Not like a Czech or Bavarian lager.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like an American lager, like an American style lager that's less malty.
Or maybe even like a white Belgian, like a Blue Moon kind of style.
Yeah, right. I have a Weizen.
You have the citrus. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that could be really refreshing with that. Yeah. Wow. No, this is a fun problem to have. But yeah, and I certainly didn't get to do that at the time. I mean, the majority of the meals I had at the Barbary Fig were before I turned 21. So even if there was alcohol on the menu, I don't recall.
J. Ryan's latest book, Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club, just came out in paperback. And much of the story centers around a family who has owned and operated a supper club in a rural Minnesota vacation town for 4 generations. After the break, grab a grasshopper and a relish tray while we explore the gloriously old school tradition of Midwestern supper clubs. I want to talk about Saturday Night at the Lakeside Supper Club. For everyone who is not in Wisconsin, Minnesota, what is a supper club?
It's a type of restaurant that has characteristics that aren't always commonly found more generally in restaurants. Family ownership that is typically sustained for generations. That sets it apart right there. It's amazing if any business in America lasts 100 years. I've been to supper clubs that have. Like, it's crazy to think of a restaurant that's over 100 years old. If there are such restaurants in the Midwest, they're most likely supper clubs. I just went to one right outside Spooner that had just celebrated its 100th anniversary. Spooner, Wisconsin.
I'm Harold Lehman, and this is my wife, Trudy Lehman. We are the owners and working partners of Lehman Supper Club in northwestern Wisconsin in Rice Lake. It opened in 1934. This August, we'll be celebrating our 90th anniversary, and we're 4 generations strong.
The cuisine is kind of hearty American cuisine. Looking back on my supper club experiences, you get fried fish on Fridays, prime rib on Saturdays, and amidst all that, a swarm of alcohol. Yeah, brandy old fashions, grasshoppers and pink squirrels for dessert. And before then, if you're at a real traditional supper club, an old school one, you'll get a lot of free food before you even order. You'll get what's called a relish tray, which is typically a crudité platter at the very least, sometimes engorged with regional specialties like pickled herring, pickled watermelon rind, cheese curds. It's the owner's discretion.
We just do a really nice fresh fruit and veggie tray that is the first course. It used to be in the 40s and 50s, way before my time. No, just kidding. That you would actually get a whole Lazy Susan tray. It would be almost a meal in itself. Lots of stuff.
We have carrots, celery, pickle, green olives, cherry peppers.
That's Heidi Etlin Elwood. She and her husband Todd are the second generation owners of Etlin's Ranchero Supper Club in the tiny 80-person village of Webster, Minnesota. Most supper clubs tend to be in rural areas or near lakes where people vacation.
And then we have like a little centerpiece in the middle, and it switches. So it could be pickled beets or refrigerator pickles or pickled zucchini. It's kind of like what's in season.
And often a basket of bread, breadsticks and butter. And so,
oh my God. Remember that from like the 80s and 90s where you would always get that? Now you don't get anything. Everything you have to pay for now.
Yeah,
restaurants are suffering right now. I mean, they can't afford to give any food away anymore.
No.
Yeah.
You get not only soup or juice, another side that you get with your main entree is you get your choice of potato also, dinner breads, and the salad course. All our soups are homemade on a regular basis. We usually have 3 a day rotating. We have 11 different salad dressings, all homemade.
You do have your choice of like salad, coleslaw, cottage cheese, or soup. The relish tray and the bread as well comes out. And then you order your dinner entree, and that comes with your choice of baked French fries, a gratin, garlic mashed, hash brown, red cabbage,
kraut.
Sauerkraut.
We're a scratch kitchen. Heidi makes all the dressings.
Yeah, all the dressings are made. Everything's made in-house.
Yes.
I'm looking at your menu and you have all of these really fun sounding old fashioned ice cream drinks. I've never heard of any of them actually. Golden Cadillac, Pink Squirrel, Pink Lady, Banshee, Grasshopper. Tell me about these drinks.
Like a Banshee would be a banana liqueur and white cream de coke. And then it's blended together with really good ice cream, wonderful Wisconsin dairy fresh ice cream. And you want it nice, thick, and creamy, topped with a cherry and fresh whipped cream.
What's a Pink Squirrel?
A Pink Squirrel is cream de almond, white de coke, and we also use a bit of almond extract in that one.
What is white de coke?
It used to be just an after dinner thing that people would have on the rocks, dark and kind of a little cocoa tasting. That is kind of a mainstay of every ice cream drink, white cream de cocoa.
So all of these ice cream drinks all have some alcohol in them?
They all have alcohol, and probably the two that are the most popular would be the Grasshopper is green cream de menthe. Brandy is still king in Wisconsin, so the one that the brandy goes into is, of course, the Brandy Alexander.
You guys have a lot of boozy desserts because I'm looking at your cakes and you have Bacardi rum cake and a Black Russian cake.
Let's just say in northern Wisconsin, we still like to add some alcohol into a lot of our things.
Just pour it on top. It's an ice cream sundae.
Yes.
We make them with soft serve ice cream, and The alcohol is just flavoring. You're only talking like a quarter shot of like creme de menthe for a grasshopper, and then probably a quarter shot of white creme de coke for a grasshopper as well. So just those two alcohols. Very nice way to finish off the evening. But yes, definitely a huge seller.
And lastly, entertainment. Most supper clubs were, date to Prohibition or so. And so they were started as speakeasies. A lot of them either initially started as doubling as entertainment venues where live bands played or dances were held, and continued that into the 40s, 50s, and 60s, which a lot of people consider to be the golden age of supper clubs, where going to a supper club was an event, not just a meal. You'd go there and have this robust dinner and then dance it off, or at the very least, watch live music.
From the menus to the wood paneling, supper clubs are a relic from an older time, but they do not appear to be going extinct. I read that there are still around 300 supper clubs operating in Wisconsin alone. Here again is Lehman's owner, Harold, who everybody calls Butch.
There's easily within, probably a 25-mile range of Rice Lake, I would say there's an additional maybe 15.
Oh, wow. Amazing. Okay, just to get more of an idea of the menu, here is Butch's perfect meal at his restaurant, Lehman's, from top to bottom.
Well, the perfect dinner in a supper club would start out meeting your friends and the people you're dining with at the bar, socializing a bit with either new or old friends there. And I would probably have just a bottle or two of Spotted Cow, which is only available in Wisconsin beer. Then we'd move into the dining room, sit down, and I'd like a New York strip steak, medium rare. I'd like a side of a beef barley soup. I would think I'd like a really nice hash brown, which is crisp on both sides and nice and creamy and chewy in the center. I might have a dinner roll, or then you have to save room for the dessert. Or my favorite anyway is probably still the old classic, and Trudy makes just a wonderful one, chocolate mousse.
I love chocolate mousse. Trudy, you do the desserts?
Yes, and our son does as well.
And this is Todd's perfect meal at Ranchero.
I would do cheese curds for a nap. I love our Thousand Islands, so I would do a salad with Thousand. I would do the veal stroganoff, one of my all-time favorite meals. Plus, the spatzel mix really well with the sauce.
Yeah.
Oh, God, I love that. Do you make homemade spitzel?
Yeah. Everything we do from scratch.
So good.
And I would probably end it with one of Heidi's cheesecakes with chocolate and raspberry.
Oh, there you go.
Heidi, do you make the desserts?
Yes.
Let's get back to Jay Ryan. You've lived in California for so long. Why do you center all of your writing around Minnesota?
I think because Minnesota made me the person I am, and I'm still trying to figure it out, both the joys and the traumas. But also because as a reader growing up in Minnesota, I felt like Minnesota wasn't represented in fiction, not nearly often enough for my taste, let alone the greater Midwest as well. So many wonderful books set in New England and the South and California and the West. Man, I was starved for it, or even a passing mention of Minnesota in a novel. And I thought, when I get old enough and I'm writing books, I'm going to set books in Minnesota for the teenage version of myself.
Yeah, one of my best friends who I've turned on to your books, he's from Minnesota, and he was like, this book could not have been written by anyone who's not from Minnesota. This book is so Minnesota. And he also, has lived on the West Coast for decades and just felt it just brought him so much comfort and nostalgia to be reading your books.
Oh, that's such an honor.
One of my favorite chapters in Kitchens of the Great Midwest is about Pat Prager and her peanut butter bars, and she brings them to the state fair. Can you talk about bars a little bit? Because that's such a Midwestern thing, too.
Oh, yeah. We grew up eating bars. In fact, that specific bars recipe, I don't know if I can see the cookbook from here, is from a Lutheran church cookbook from my great-grandmother's church.
That's where the recipe in the book comes from?
Yeah, from like the 1980 edition. So this was a recipe that had been passed down and that my grandmother had made and my mom made. Those are the peanut butter bars I grew up knowing. And even though it's specious to enter them in a baking contest because there's no baking involved, I thought, I'm writing the novel. I want the dessert I like the best to win. So that's why I had these bars enter a contest and emerged victorious with the recipe published right there in the book. And it turned out that my suspicion was more than correct. I'm afraid to report that I inspired a lot of people to make those bars and bring them to me.
Oh.
Much to the detriment to my waistline. But
when you were on book tour.
Exactly. Yeah. And I was overjoyed. I had no idea that this book would inspire people to make these bars. I put the recipe in just to kind of honor my ancestors and to show them, like, look how simple this is. Like, this is what they did. And this pleased a lot of people. Look how easy it is to make someone happy, is what I was trying to say by publishing that recipe. And it turns out that that's still true. People probably made those bars and brought them to events of mine, I'm going to say around 40 or 50 times.
Oh my God. And like full pans full?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah. And I would encourage people to say, like, oh, yeah, after the reading, come up and help me out with these bars, please. Because often I was on a tour too. Like, I had to get on a plane the next day. You know,
right,
I wasn't checking bags. Like,
right.
You're going to get these bars through security. Like, and then if I was staying in the Midwest, if it was like flying from Milwaukee to St. Paul, for example, there's a good chance I get a plate of bars at the next destination. So I was always staring down the barrel of like managing bar consumption. But it was a good problem to have. And I was really, really thrilled that people were inspired and moved to make that recipe.
And that was J. Ryan Stradal's last meal. Cool. Well, thank you so much. This was really, really fun. I appreciate you doing the interview.
I didn't know until this conversation you were in Seattle. That's awesome. I love that city. And next time we come up, I might send you an email for suggestions on.
Please do.
Yeah.
I would love it. Take care. Have a good day.
You too, Rachel. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.
You can find a link to all 3 of his novels in the show notes. Thanks to Butch and Trudy Lehman, owners of Lehman Supper Club in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. Well, thank you both so much. This was so much fun, and thanks for squeezing me in at the last minute.
Well, it is our pleasure. And I had one question.
Yes.
So you live in Seattle?
Yes.
Do you do your own laundry?
Yes, I do.
Oh, because I hear everybody who lives out there, they do a ton of Washington.
Oh, boy. You're lucky that I like puns.
Sorry. Thank you for doing this. Have a good day and be well.
Thank you. Yes, you're in a safe space for punning, Butch, so it's all good. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy anniversary. Bye.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to Heidi Etlin Elwood and Todd Elwood over at Etlin's Ranchero Supper Club in Webster, Minnesota. Honestly, I am so ready to book a trip to Minnesota. I really, really want to go on a supper club crawl. Last week on Instagram, I saw something about a cat parade in Minnesota. So I have 2 reasons to buy this plane ticket now. There's also a national park I'd like to visit. I've never been to Minneapolis. I think it's time to go to Minnesota. Your Last Meal is a product of Seattle's Cascade PBS. This episode was produced with Isaac Kaplan-Woolner, mixed and mastered by Sarah Bernard, editing assistance from Maliha Syed. I created, host, and co-produce Your Last Meal. Original theme music by Prom Queen. Make sure and tune in next week for our new segment called The Leftovers, where you can hear a speed round with J. Ryan Stradal. It's in the same feed as Your Last Meal, so as long as you're subscribed to Your Last Meal in your podcast app, you will never miss an episode. And while you're there, maybe give us a little rate and review. I'm Rachel Bell, and this is Your Last Meal. Okay. All right, here we go.
Well, I'll tell you, we'll invite you on August 18th to our 90th anniversary. Come on out and you'll have as many stories as you can use on a podcast for a year.
I'm not going to be able to make it. Will you give me one story?
Maybe we could change the date.
Yeah, could you? I'm going to be in Iceland then. Maybe could you do it in September?
We could do it in September.